Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. This is just an update on the issues of what to do with Zimbabwe regarding the recent rigged elections. As I said yesterday, the Sadak heads of state met in Angola and the best they could do is acknowledge the report that was produced by Sadak on the Zimbabwe elections, condemning those elections as a farce. And unfortunately, the communique did not say much. And it didn't help the conclusion what most people have derived from that statement at the end of the summit is that, yes, they've noted it, they've received it and noted the report, but they're not going to do anything. And many people, and I think many Zimbabweans, put to the social media commentary, were rightly disappointed by that. And many would have been pointing an accusing finger at South Africa. There's no doubt that South Africa is the dominant nation in the Sadak region, and that South Africa has played a rather cynical role right through this whole saga. And so rightly people have been pointing an accusing finger at South Africa. And it should be remembered here that South Africa in November last year came out ahead of the elections declaring that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. That statement, like it or not, was a clear indication to ZANU-PF that South Africa would back them up, whatever happened. Clearly, South Africa expected that the Sadak Election Observer team would do the usual thing, go into the country as election observers, gloss over everything that is happening, and rubber stamp the election process as substantially free, fair, and credible. And then South Africa would have stepped in, giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. And so when the Sadak election team came up with the report condemning the election, I think South Africa was taken aback. And they didn't expect that. But nonetheless, whilst other countries refused to attend Mnangagwa's inauguration, President Cyril Ramaphosa and the high-powered delegation from South Africa were some of the attendees. The gentleman I've got in the picture here is ANC Secretary General, Hichilema. He is the one who made the announcement following the November ANC Congress meeting that South Africa would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe, and robustly defended that position. He was so robust that he even called Zimbabwe's main opposition party, Nelson Chamisa, a puppet. that is really uncharacteristic language, particularly when he knew that Zimbabwe was going to go into an election in a few months' time. And who knows, the people of Zimbabwe may decide to elect Nelson Chamisa as president. How was South Africa going to work with Nelson Chamisa after the party publicly called him a puppet? So I think by calling him a puppet, what the ANC was doing, it was nailing its colors publicly, declaring that they will never support the opposition, Triple C in Zimbabwe. That is an unusual position. What is annoying here is that South Africa is now coming out after the yesterday's meeting, when everybody could see Sadak has been divided, because only 7 out of 16 heads of state actually attended that Sadak meeting. And some of them failed to do so, just as much as only 3 heads of state attended Mnangagwa's inauguration, showing that with the Sadak report being so damning, it really has been difficult for Sadak to justify how they can ignore their own internal report to accept the ZANU-PF as the legitimate government in Zimbabwe. But that is exactly what South Africa has been trying to push through here. And in this particular video, which is a statement from ANC ever since yesterday's meeting, we can hear it from the horse's own mouth what South Africa's position is vis-a-vis this issue of what to do with ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. Just listen to this.
Everyone, you're welcome to Jam Vibes. Fikile Balula has decided to break silence based on all what is ongoing in Zimbabwe. And of course, Balula responds to Mnangagwa's election win, which has caused a great stir on the socials. He said, let Zimbabweans settle their own disputes. And this is sidelining South Africa based on everything ongoing in Zim, and this didn't sit so well with many. Before I give you every single detail about what was revealed, kindly do also follow Jam Vibes, please. Like this video, drop a comment, and above all, share this video with all of your friends and family members. African National Congress, that is the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Balula, took to social media on Sunday to address the allegations of electoral irregularities surrounding the recently concluded Zimbabwean presidential election. The elections, which declared incumbent President Mnangagwa the victor, have been marred by claims of election rigging and impropriety. Now, Balula Fikile, the ANC Secretary General, decided to go on X, formerly called Twitter, and had this to post, and I quote, let Zimbabweans settle their own dispute through their constitutional mechanisms. In a series of tweets, Fikile Mbalula defended the election outcome, asserting that Zimbabweans should address their grievances through their constitutional mechanisms. His statement sought to underscore the ANC's commitment to upholding the principles of sovereignty and democratic norms, supporting Zimbabwe's rights to determine its leadership through established legal procedures. But then again, there have been so many election rigging allegations already as far as the Zimbabwean presidential election is concerned, and he seems not to even care about all of what the people have to say. He deals with what he knows. The Zimbabwean presidential elections have been under scrutiny due to allegations of election rigging and concerns about the integrity of the results. Critics have raised doubts about the credibility of the electoral process, calling for a thorough investigation into these allegations. But now, Balula's statement then reflects ANC's position based on all what is ongoing already in Zimbabwe linked up with South Africa. As the Secretary General of the ANC, Balula's remarks reflect the party's stance on the matter, emphasizing the importance of respecting Zimbabwean sovereignty while highlighting the significance of transparent and accountable electoral processes. The ANC's support for Zimbabwe's rights to manage its internal affairs is in line with their commitments to democracy and adherence to established legal and institutional frameworks. There is so much global interest already as far as the election dialogue is concerned in Zimbabwe and the upcoming one of South Africa too, because the ongoing dialogue concerning the Zimbabwean election results has attracted international attention, underscoring the importance of transparent, credible, and accountable electoral processes in shaping the political landscape of the region. As Zimbabwe grapples with the aftermath of the elections, and South Africa, of course, through the ANC's position as well of Fikile Balula, as articulated by Fikile, reinforces the principles of democratic governance and respect for sovereignty within the region, setting a significant procedure for future electoral contests already. This has split the internet into two, and let us well recall that even during the inauguration of Emerson Mnangagwa, we saw ANC president, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who answered present, and everybody was more or less like, why would he be going to such, inauguration, knowing fully well that there are allegations of fraud all over the place? And I kept asking myself, why wouldn't he go? Because we know fully well that South Africa happens to be the biggest and most influential country in the southern part of Africa, right? Anyways, tell me what you think in the comment section, guys.
There we have it.
Zimbabweans should address their
What I find ridiculous and hypocritical is that here is the Secretary General of ANC. In November last year, the party made a party resolution. That means they must have debated it to come to that resolution, that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. Now, that is a very bold and arrogant position for a foreign nation to take over another country, to start dictating who should rule in another country. And this has been brought home by the very fact that Sadak's own election body has since come out and say, no, Mnangagwa rigged the elections. And yet, as we can see, ANC is hell-bent on making sure that Mnangagwa and his NOPF still remain in power. There is no regime change. And now he turns around and tells us he respects rule of law and the sovereignty of another country. Zimbabwe is a sovereign nation which must be allowed to resolve its own election disputes. This is really ironic and hypocritical. South Africa in November was saying that they will not allow regime change. In other words, they were not recognizing the sovereignty of Zimbabwe. And now when the incumbent regime has shown blatant disregard for the sovereign will of the people of Zimbabwe, their right to have a meaningful say on who governs the country. South Africa, because it is happy with the outcome, pretends to respect the sovereignty of Zimbabwe. Where is the sovereignty there? The people have just been denied their fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. And you turn around and saying that is being sovereign. You're only respecting it because that is the result you were seeking. It is truly amazing. In Shona, we have got a saying that mbuzi inoberekera pana vanhu kuti dzingigwe makondo, which roughly translated means the goat will give birth near people, expecting them to chase away the eagles and other wild animals that may attack its young. I think we have got here, in the form of ANC in South Africa, an individual who is so cynical. He is leaving the hyena as the midwife of the goat, and is adamant that left to their own devices, they will sort things out. The people of Zimbabwe are totally helpless in this case. What is the point of having Sadak if Sadak is absolutely useless? The regime has rigged the elections. Sadak's own body has clearly said that in its report. The report cannot be, there's no room for misunderstanding in what the report is saying. The elections failed to meet Zimbabwe's own constitution and electoral laws. And it violated Sadak's own principles and guidelines on free and fair elections. It could not be any more clearer than that. And yet we are being told here, oh no, leave Zimbabwe to sort it out. They're a sovereign nation. Well, this is absolutely meaningless. I think it is important here to understand something that maybe some of the people are not aware of. The truth of the matter is, ANC has been in power in South Africa for come next year to be 30 years. And those who have been following the situation in South Africa will tell you that South Africa's economy is in serious trouble. And the root cause is 30 years of gross mismanagement and rampant corruption. These are very familiar causes for countries like Zimbabwe. If the people of Zimbabwe had had the opportunity to have free, fair, and credible elections, they would have replaced ZANU-PF decades ago. Alas, ZANU-PF has been rigging elections. So the people of Zimbabwe found themselves stuck with the regime. This is the tragedy in Zimbabwe. ANC, why is it fighting on the side of ZANU-PF? The truth of the matter is, ANC sees its own position, its hold on power, slipping away. The state of the South African economy is nothing to write home about. And if Zimbabwe had had free, fair, and credible elections, and had managed to replace this ZANU-PF tyrannical regime, it is highly probable that the economy would have picked up. I say so because in 2008, when the country had a GNU, The first year of the GNU, the economy recovered by a staggering 12% compared to the minus 6% growth rate the previous year. If the people of South Africa were to see such miraculous recovery, I can rest assure you, they too would have the courage to say, well, maybe we need to change our government too. And South Africa will find itself in next year's elections on the back foot. That is the position that South Africa would not want to find itself campaigning. The country where people are saying, well, other countries we have managed to replace the ruling party with a new government. They've made progress. They've shown economic recovery. Is it possible that South Africa can do the same? If that was to happen, our friend, Secretary General Balula, would find himself in a position where, while he is aspiring to be one day the president of South Africa, as long as the ANC remains a dominant party, that dream will be snuffed out. And the best way to protect that dream is to make sure that liberation parties in the region, some of them have been replaced, but those that are still there, notably Zimbabwe, because of its proximity to South Africa, it is in the interest of South Africa, or rather of ANC, to make sure that there is no regime change in Zimbabwe. At least not until next year's elections, when ANC hopes it will secure its own position, its own hold on power. That is the reason why South Africa is hell-bent on making sure that ZANU-PF remains in power at all costs. It is tragic because the economic collapse in Zimbabwe has not helped South Africa, actually. South African economy, I think, would have done a lot better if Zimbabwe had been a prosperous nation that it was, say, at the time when Zimbabwe became independent and was trading freely with South Africa. But with the Zimbabwe economy having collapsed completely, that is one trading partner South Africa lost. And hence, why South Africa is in the mess it is in. So it is really cynical, to say the very least, that South Africa is now turning around and pretending that it is doing Zimbabwe a great favor by allowing Zimbabwe to solve its own problems. What is the point of us turning to Sadak if we could solve our own problems? And clearly, we have failed to solve our own problems. If we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections, what are the reason? What are the signs that South Africa want to see to show that we have failed? It is a pity that Sadak itself is finding itself in this position, because I think if this is allowed to stick, if ZANU-PF is allowed to get away with this rigged election, it will send a clear message to the rest of the Sadak leaders that they do not have to bother about holding free, fair, and credible elections. They can get away with it. And I think as a whole region, this is not going to augur well. Because if we cannot hold free, fair, and credible elections, then, of course, people will have to resort to other means to effect regime change. And this can only mean even more instability. So this problem is something that we should look out for, one we should be concerned about. And it is a pity that we have failed to solve, as Zimbabweans, we, meaning Zimbabweans, we have failed to solve our own problems. We have failed to even hold free, fair, and credible election, even after 43 years of independence and in this day and age. It is a pity that Sadak, as the regional body, has failed to stamp out this case of rigged elections. And I think this probably will be the first time, as far as I know, when Sadak's own body has condemned the election process. And alas, Sadak, the heads of state, have failed to uphold one of their own bodies' election reports. And it is tragic that we have got a neighbor like South Africa who are in a position to help the whole region be stable and enjoy fundamental rights like free, fair, and credible elections. And yet it's taken its eye on that and is concentrating on just winning power. There's no doubt that the ANC is desperate to hang on to power and will do anything to hang on to power. And we just happens to be the sacrificial lamb, meaning Zimbabweans. But I think it's not only Zimbabweans who will suffer from this. The whole region will suffer from this. Thank you very much, Tina. The comment there, I love the analog which you use about the goat. Honestly, South Africa is out of order. It's high time Zimbabwe should stand up for this so-called bully South Africa. God bless HH. I couldn't agree with you more. I think President Hichilema of Zambia tried his best. And I also applaud the election observer team for having the courage to report on what they saw on the ground. It is a pity that Sadak heads have again been found wanting, at least some of them, and failed to stand up and be counted when it really mattered. I don't know what's going to happen, but if this situation is allowed to continue, South Africa is allowed to have its own way, because let's face it, South Africa is the dominant nation and it has been pushing its singular agenda that it didn't want regime change in Zimbabwe. And right now it's getting to be even more embarrassing because the regime change that it doesn't want in Zimbabwe turns out to be a regime that has just rigged the elections. And propping up a regime that has just rigged the election, I think, is something that the ANC itself should seriously think. Is that the route you want to take Sadak? And you want to be remembered as a Sadak leader. I hope, seriously hope, that Sadak leaders are going to really say, no, this cannot be allowed to carry on. At the present moment, allowing ZANU-PF to do as they please in Zimbabwe, what we can expect to happen is maybe that Sadak, that ZANU-PF will sit down with Triple C and Nelson Chamisa will be offered the position of the official opposition party leader, complete with the ministerial car and the generous salary and allowances, and they will accept that. And so we'll have some form of government of national unity, if you want, although there will not be any undertaking to implement any meaningful reforms, so that in 5 years from now, in 2028, for the next election, we'll be holding the elections under the same conditions as we held these last ones. And without reforms, I can say here and now that ZANU-PF will rig those elections, and we'll be back to where we started. And I'm sure that as long as the two parties come to some kind of arrangement, the situation will continue. And so this has become a way of perpetuating the dictatorship and the failed state and the consequences of the tragedy that it has brought to the nation in the form of the failed economy and the tragic human suffering that it has brought. So at the present moment, signs are that Sadak, yes, we have seen the report, and they're kicking it into the tall grass. And South Africa is pretending that it's washing its hands of Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe is a sovereign country. And no doubt is trying to persuade the rest of SADC to leave Zimbabwe alone on the same basis, which is rather cynical. Why did SADC send an election observer team? If it felt that Zimbabwe is a sovereign country, it can hold its own elections. Why did SADC bother coming up with its own principles and guidelines on democratic elections? ZANU-PF rigged these elections. That is a fact. And allowing ZANU-PF to remain in power is honestly being as cynical as leaving a hyena to be midwife to a goat. I can't think of anything more sickening than that. And the ANC should be ashamed that it is now in the business of propping up tyrannical regimes. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.